the less you pee. Those are the words of the noted psychologist and expert in trauma, Mercedes Mann, my grandmother. That was my first lesson in Black folk mental health. In layman's terms, stop all that damn crying. In more clinical terms, it's a passed down coping mechanism used to teach the internalization of trauma to maintain survival. It's giving very much, this is what I learned, so this is what I'm going to teach you. I am a Black therapist with a Black therapist, and I find human behavior fascinating. I've been in the field for 16 years, and I have a private practice where I work with majority Black women. In my observation, Black people are dope. Despite stolen lands and stolen bodies and stolen culture, despite laws and psychology and science skewed and used with white supremacy in order to justify the inhumane treatment, Black people have mastered survival. Surviving and living and loving and worshiping and being so damn beautiful. But I wonder, how? What protective factors are at play? So I have a theory. Ride out with me on this one. Trauma responses. In order to maintain survival, Black people have integrated trauma responses into the culture. So much so that we hand it down from generation to generation under the guise of values and traditions. Let's get into it. Let's talk science. Trauma responses are a physiological reaction in response to a perceived harmful event, a threat, or a threat to survival. A necessary system, it was wired into the human nervous system in order to keep us safe. So if there was a bear in the wild, this system would kick in to maintain survival. While it's necessary, it was never intended to be a long-term solution. The body is not meant to stay in that state of arousal. It's supposed to be short-term. Keep that in mind. All right, boom, let's talk American history. During the transatlantic slave trade, Europeans built the foundation of this country on the raping, pillaging, enslaving, dehumanizing of Africans. They used mental, physical, and spiritual warfare in order to integrate white supremacy into the violence. They skewed psychology, religion, and science, all to justify this treatment. For example, drapetomania, which is when enslaved Africans would attempt to run away, was once a mental health diagnosis. So, with all that said, traumatizing Black bodies is as American as the strange fruit in apple pie. When a community is traumatized over and over, it causes a collective trauma experience. So when we put the science and the history together, white supremacy is the bear. White supremacy is the bear. But let's take it a step further. When I started, I said, the more you cry, the less you pee as a clinical intervention. Due to the Black trauma experience my grandmother had learned and subsequently was teaching, the internalization of emotions is a safety concern. To externalize emotions does not maintain survival. Now, I didn't know when she was telling me this, if this was about the fact that I used the bathroom so much or the fact that I was so emotional. Either way, it was a deliberate attempt to stop the mind-body connection. Survival mode. Black people live our entire lives in survival mode. I'm gonna let that sink in. Black people, there is trauma in your traditions. Now, what does this look like? It looks like everyday lessons we learn, some verbal and nonverbal, that are given to us with the intent of maintaining survival. So, for example, respectability politics, trauma response. When we grow up, we learn we have to work 10 times harder than everybody else. Make sure you get to work on time. You know them white folks watching you. Don't get in here and embarrass me in front of these white people. Whatever you do, please don't give them a reason to call the police. The rigorous internal and external self-awareness rooted in anti-Blackness is traumatizing to the system. It is exhausting. Maintain survival mode. Code switching, trauma response. Yo, so the way I talk to the people I know and other black people, like, yes, girl, you better do it and do it well. It's substantially different than the way I talk in the workplace. Good morning, Megan. How you doing? You're awesome. Code switching is a means of survival. It literally means getting and keeping the job. And code switching is not just a change in language, it's a change in tone, intonation, volume, pitch, and the way I carry myself. It is exhausting. Maintain survival mode. The strong black woman trope, trauma response. So I was in session with a beautiful black human, and they said to me, well, I hold the weight, but I hold it well. And I said to them, well, what would happen if you didn't hold the weight? She was talking about stress. What would happen if you put it down? And we both looked out the window together because black women rarely learn ourselves outside of stress, outside of trauma. It's as if every lesson that we get is supposed to teach us to be strong. The more you cry, the less you pee. Stop all that crying. Be strong. Your job is supposed to be stressful. Makes you strong. People are supposed to have access to your body. Makes you strong. Love is supposed to hurt. Makes you strong. You're supposed to strap the world on your back. Makes you strong. I've had black women come into my office and spout off trauma like grocery lists. Always maintaining composure. Never leaving survival mode. My name is Jelan Agnew, and I am a licensed clinical social worker. When I go to various trainings and workshops, this is how I introduce myself. It might sound normal, however, I am having a trauma response. It's a mix of respectability politics, code switching, and the strong black woman trope. I, through the lessons that I've learned that I have to show myself in a different way. Because I have distant memories of daily microaggressions. And oh my God, are you the new staff? What do you work in the kitchen? And being overlooked for a position. And oh my God, Jelan, I thought you were the other African-American woman. I'm so sorry. And crying and being called aggressive. Giving validation to my grandmother's wise words. And like I said earlier, trauma responses are not intended to be long-term. When you are in a constant state of survival, your body cannot regenerate and rest, leaving more room for illness. Mental, physical, and spiritual illness. Black people, there is trauma in your traditions and illness in your trauma. Now, when I started this, I said I believe that healing black people is what I'm on earth for. And I think it's time for a mindset shift from surviving to thriving. Because we are in survival mode so much that rest makes us uncomfortable. So I suggest resting by any means necessary. Realizing that internal peace is a revolutionary act. Valuing health over hustle. And making sure that we're doing all these things to keep ourselves alive, because I can go on and on about the trauma responses. Hustle, trauma response. Colorism, trauma response. Putting cancer-causing chemicals in our hair that causes cancer, trauma response. Our addiction to unhealthy foods, trauma response. Our aversion to traditional and indigenous religious beliefs, trauma response. So I'm going to add something to what my grandmother said. The more you cry, the more at health you will be.